This is how the divine masculinity falls deeply in love with the twin flame Carl Jung. From the bottom of my heart, I wish the divine masculinity energies locate and falls deeply in love with your feminine twin flame, because you deserve the deepest, best meaningful relationship from your soulmate. How do men fall in love? The psychology of the divine masculine brain in twin flame love, Carl Jung. The soul recognition that changes everything. Some connections change your entire inner world. There are relationships that enter your life quietly, and then there are connections that shake your entire soul awake. The kind where one conversation changes your emotional world forever. The kind where a single look feels more intimate than years spent with someone else. You try to explain it logically, but nothing makes sense. Your mind says, slow down, while your soul whispers, you already know this person. This is what many people call a twin flame or soulmate connection. And according to Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, these rare connections are not random at all. Jung believed that certain people appear in our lives to awaken hidden parts of ourselves. They arrive not only to be loved, but to transform us emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. That is why twin flame connections feel different from ordinary attraction. It is not just chemistry, it is recognition. A recognition so deep that it bypasses logic completely. And when the divine masculine experiences this type of soul recognition, something powerful begins happening inside him. Something he often cannot explain even to himself, because the masculine mind may resist it, but the soul recognizes it immediately. The divine masculine does not fall in love slowly. It feels more like an emotional collision. Most people think men fall in love gradually, step by step, conversation by conversation. But deep soulmate connections rarely unfold that way. When the divine masculine meets his true energetic counterpart, the experience can feel sudden, overwhelming, and emotionally destabilizing. One moment he feels emotionally independent. The next moment he cannot stop thinking about her presence. This creates an inner conflict many men are unprepared for, because for years he built an identity around emotional control. He learned to stay composed, to avoid vulnerability, to appear strong even when he was hurting. But soulmate love breaks through those defenses. Suddenly, he feels emotionally exposed without understanding why. Her energy affects him deeply. Her absence affects him deeply. Even small moments with her begin carrying emotional weight. And this is where the fear begins, not because he does not care, but because he cares too much. Carl Jung once explained that the human ego fears anything powerful enough to transform it, and nothing transforms the masculine ego faster than real soul-level love. Why he pulls away after getting close. The battle between the soul and the ego. One of the most painful parts of twin flame connections is the push and pull. Dynamic. Everything feels beautiful, until suddenly it doesn't. He opens up emotionally, then becomes distant. He feels deeply connected, then disappears emotionally. To the feminine energy, this behavior feels confusing and painful. But psychologically, something deeper is happening. The masculine is experiencing a war between two parts of himself. The soul wants connection. The ego wants protection. And in the early stages of soulmate love, protection usually wins first. Why? Because true intimacy threatens the emotional walls he spent years building. Imagine a man who has lived his whole life believing strength means needing nobody. Then suddenly he meets someone whose presence softens him, emotionally without effort. That experience can feel terrifying, not weak. Terrifying, because now he realizes he can be emotionally affected. He can miss someone. He can long for someone. he can lose emotional control. And for many men, that realization shakes their entire identity. So he withdraws, not always because he wants to leave, but because he is trying to regain emotional balance. Carl Jung and the anima connection. Why certain women transform the masculine soul. Carl Jung introduced a fascinating concept called the anima. The anima represents the feminine, energy living inside the unconscious mind of every man. According to Jung, when a man meets a woman who deeply reflects this inner feminine image, the emotional impact becomes life-changing. Suddenly, he feels emotionally alive in ways he never experienced before. Conversations feel deeper. Silence feels meaningful. Even eye contact feels intense. This is why soulmate connections often feel spiritual, because the masculine is not only connecting with the woman in front of him, he is connecting with lost parts of himself, and that is why the connection becomes unforgettable. The twin flame awakens emotions he buried years ago: compassion, sensitivity, vulnerability, emotional depth. And although these qualities are beautiful, they can also overwhelm a man who was conditioned to suppress them. That is why soulmate love often creates emotional contradictions inside the masculine. He wants closeness, but fears emotional dependence. He wants connection, but fears losing control. And until he learns to integrate both strength and vulnerability, the relationship can move through painful emotional cycles. The biggest mistake people make in twin flame connections: chasing love instead of becoming whole. When the masculine pulls away emotionally, the natural instinct is to chase him, to seek reassurance, to ask for explanations, to fight harder for the connection. But this often creates the opposite effect. That is why soulmate connections feel so intense. They force emotional evolution, not surface-level attraction, real transformation. The divine masculine does not fall deeply in love through logic alone. He falls in love when something touches his soul deeply, enough to awaken the parts of himself he spent years hiding. And although his first reaction may be fear, distance, or emotional confusion, the connection continues working inside him long after the moment passes. Because soulmate love is not ordinary attraction. It is emotional awakening. It is spiritual recognition. It is the soul quietly saying, "This person came into your life to change you forever." And sometimes the greatest love story is not about finding someone else, but about discovering who you become because of the connection. Why the divine masculine runs from the love he secretly wants. Introduction: the pain of loving someone who pulls away. One of the most confusing experiences in a soulmate or twin flame connection is this: how can someone love you deeply and still run from you? At first, it makes no sense. You feel the connection. You see it in their eyes. You feel it in the silence between conversations. Everything inside you says the connection is real. And yet, just when things become emotionally deep, the divine masculine begins pulling away again. Suddenly, he becomes distant, busy, emotionally unavailable, cold in moments where he once felt warm and open. This creates heartbreak for many people because the behavior feels contradictory. But according to Carl Jung's understanding of the human psyche, contradiction is exactly what happens when someone is facing inner transformation. Because the divine masculine is not only fighting his feelings for you, he is fighting the version of himself your presence is awakening. And sometimes that battle becomes overwhelming. The fear is not love. The fear is vulnerability. Why emotional exposure feels dangerous to him. Most men are taught from an early age that vulnerability is risky. They learn to hide emotional pain, remain composite problems internally, Many men grow up believing that needing emotional support somehow makes them weak. So when soulmate love enters their life, something unexpected happens. For the first time, they feel emotionally seen beyond the surface. And that experience can feel both beautiful and terrifying at once. Because now there is someone who can affect them deeply. Someone whose absence creates emotional discomfort. Someone whose opinion suddenly matters more than they expected. That level of emotional impact can feel destabilizing for the masculine psyche. Carl Jung believed that the ego always tries to protect the identity a person has built over time. And if a man built his identity around emotional control, independence, and self-protection, soulmate love threatens all of it at once. This is why some men withdraw after moments of emotional closeness, not because the connection is fake, but because it feels too real. Why he goes silent after intense moments. The nervous system overload. Have you ever noticed how soulmate connections often move through cycles? Deep conversation, emotional closeness, powerful chemistry, then suddenly, silence, distance, confusion. This happens because intense emotional experiences activate parts of the nervous system that many people are not emotionally prepared to process, especially the divine masculine. Imagine someone who spent years suppressing emotions suddenly feeling everything at once. Love, fear, desire, attachment, longing, hope. The emotional intensity becomes overwhelming, so the mind reacts the only way it knows how, by creating distance. This is not always conscious behavior. Sometimes the masculine does not even understand why he is pulling away. He only knows he feels emotionally overloaded, and distance temporarily gives him the illusion of control again. This explains why many men disappear emotionally after deeply intimate moments. The connection touched something real inside them, something powerful, and they need time to emotionally process what they are feeling. The divine masculine tests the connection. He wants to know if the feelings will fade. One of the hidden psychological patterns in twin flame dynamics is emotional testing. The masculine often creates distance to test himself emotionally. He wonders, will these feelings disappear if I stay away? Will this emotional intensity calm down? Can I regain control of myself? At first, he believes distance will weaken the connection. But in many soulmate journeys, the opposite happens. The connection grows stronger in separation. He thinks about her unexpectedly. He remembers small details. Songs suddenly carry emotional meaning. Places remind him of her. Even while trying to move forward, the emotional bond remains alive inside him. This creates frustration because now he realizes this connection is not superficial attraction. It is deeper than that. And depth is exactly what scares him. Because depth requires emotional honesty. Carl Jung and the Shadow Self. Why soulmate love awakens hidden wounds. Carl Jung taught that every human being carries a shadow self. The shadow contains the emotions, fears, insecurities, and unresolved pain we try to avoid facing. Most ordinary relationships never fully activate the shadow, but soulmate connections do. Suddenly, abandonment wounds appear. Fear of rejection appears. Fear of not being enough appears. Fear of losing control appears. And both people begin confronting emotional patterns they never fully healed. This is why soulmate love can feel emotionally exhausting at times. It is not only romance, it is emotional exposure. The divine masculine may suddenly realize he has been emotionally disconnected from himself for years. He may recognize how deeply he fears intimacy. He may discover that underneath his confidence is a fear of emotional dependence. and these realizations can create emotional chaos internally. Jung believed that true transformation only happens when a person becomes conscious of what was previously hidden. That is exactly what soulmate connections force people to do. They bring unconscious wounds into the light, not to punish you, but to heal you. The feminine energy often misunderstands the process. Love cannot heal someone who refuses to face himself. One of the hardest truths in soulmate relationships is understanding this. You cannot do someone else's inner work for them. No amount of love can force emotional readiness. No amount of patience can heal wounds someone refuses to face. This realization hurts deeply because when we love someone, we naturally want to help them heal. We want to reassure them, support them, save the connection. But healing only becomes real when the person chooses it for themselves. The divine masculine must eventually face his own fears honestly. He must confront the emotional walls he built. He must learn that vulnerability is not weakness, and no soulmate can complete that journey for him. Carl Jung believed that every person must walk through their own psychological transformation consciously. No one can do the work on their behalf, and this is why chasing the masculine often delays the process instead of helping it, because if he avoids his own emotional growth while depending on your constant reassurance, nothing truly changes internally. Growth requires responsibility. The moment the masculine begins changing, exhaustion breaks the ego before love opens the heart. There comes a moment in many twin flame journeys where the divine masculine becomes exhausted from fighting himself, exhausted from pretending not to care, exhausted from emotional suppression, exhausted from running away from feelings that never fully disappear. And slowly, something begins shifting inside him. Not dramatically, not instantly, quietly. He begins realizing that resisting the connection hurts more than accepting it. This is a powerful psychological turning point, because now the ego is no longer protecting him. It is exhausting him. And according to Jung, transformation often begins the moment the old identity becomes too painful to maintain. The masculine starts lowering emotional defenses little by little. He becomes more emotionally present, more honest, more consistent. Not because someone forced him to change, but because he finally understands that love is not destroying him. It is revealing him. Why authenticity attracts him. BACK. The feminine energy heals by returning to herself. One of the most powerful shifts in soulmate dynamics happens when the feminine stops centering her entire life around the connection. Instead of waiting emotionally, she begins living again, creating again, healing again, growing again. This changes the energy completely. Now the connection is no longer built on emotional desperation. It becomes grounded in authenticity. And the masculine feels this immediately. Why? Because deep down, the masculine soul is naturally drawn toward emotional truth, not performance, not manipulation, not emotional pressure. Truth. When he sees someone who remains emotionally grounded even through pain, something inside him deeply respects it, because now love no longer feels like emotional captivity. It feels like emotional safety. And emotional safety is what allows real intimacy to grow. The divine masculine does not run because he feels nothing. He runs because he feels too much. The connection awakens emotions he spent years suppressing. It exposes fears he never wanted to face. It challenges the identity he built around emotional control. And although the running creates pain, it is often part of a deeper psychological transformation taking place beneath the surface. Carl Jung believed That love becomes transformational when it forces us to meet the hidden parts of ourselves. That is exactly what soulmate connections do. They reveal the soul beneath the mask, and eventually, the divine masculine reaches a crossroads, continue running from himself, or finally allow love to transform him from within. And when he chooses transformation over fear, everything about the connection begins to change. When the divine masculine realizes the connection is real, introduction, the moment he can nitrogen monoxide longer deny what he feels. There comes a moment in many twin flame journeys when the divine masculine realizes something important. The connection is not disappearing. No matter how much distance he creates, no matter how busy he becomes, no matter how hard he tries to rationalize the relationship, the emotional bond remains alive inside him. And this realization changes everything, because now he understands that this is not ordinary attraction. It is not temporary excitement. It is not emotional obsession. It is something deeper, something that continues living inside him even in silence. At first, this realization can make him uncomfortable, because the masculine mind wants certainty and control. But soulmate connections rarely follow logic. They unfold through emotional awakening. And according to Carl Jung, the soul always pulls people toward the parts of themselves they most need to discover. That is why this connection keeps returning to his mind. It is not only about the other person anymore. It is about who he becomes because of the connection. The divine masculine starts questioning his old life. The awakening begins internally. One of the biggest signs that the masculine is deeply falling in love is this. His inner world starts changing. The things that once distracted him no longer feel fulfilling. Conversations with other people feel empty. Surface-level relationships lose their emotional excitement. Even success, work, or social validation begin feeling strangely incomplete. Why? Because soulmate love awakens emotional depth. And once someone experiences soul-level connection, ordinary experiences often stop satisfying them the same way. This can create confusion inside the masculine. He may begin questioning his choices, his emotional patterns, his relationships, even his identity. Carl Jung believed that psychological awakening often begins with inner dissatisfaction. The old version of life no longer feels aligned with the soul. And that is exactly what happens here. The divine masculine begins sensing that the life he built emotionally may not reflect who he truly is anymore. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of transformation. He starts seeing the feminine differently. She becomes emotionally irreplaceable. At the beginning of the connection, the masculine may try convincing himself that the feelings are temporary. He may believe he simply feels attracted, curious, interested, but over time something changes. The feminine energy becomes emotionally unforgettable. He notices that nobody affects him the same way. Nobody understands him the same way. Nobody touches his inner world the same way. And slowly, he realizes that her presence brought something into his life that cannot be replaced easily. Peace, depth, inspiration, emotional truth. This realization often happens quietly, not through dramatic moments, but through absence. He notices how different life feels without her energy around him. Suddenly, the world feels emotionally flatter. And this is where many divine masculines begin understanding that what they feel is real love, because real love changes your inner experience of life itself. Carl Jung and the journey of individuation. Why twin flame love forces emotional growth. Carl Jung believed every human being carries two versions of themselves, the person they show the world, and the deeper self hidden underneath. The process of becoming your authentic self is what Jung called individuation, and soulmate connections accelerate this process dramatically. Why? Because the connection forces emotional honesty. The divine masculine can no longer hide behind emotional masks forever. Eventually, he must confront his fears directly. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, and perhaps the biggest fear of all, the fear of truly being seen. Twin flame love strips away emotional performance. It reveals the real person underneath. And while this process can feel painful, it is also deeply healing. Because healing begins the moment someone stops pretending. The masculine starts longing for emotional peace. Love stops feeling like weakness. Earlier in the journey, the masculine often associates emotional intensity with danger. Love feels overwhelming, unstable, threatening. But as he grows emotionally, something beautiful begins happening. He slowly realizes that love itself is not the problem. The real problem was the fear he carried inside himself. And this changes the entire connection. Now, instead of seeing vulnerability as weakness, he begins understanding it as emotional courage. He realizes that opening his heart does not destroy his strength. It deepens it. This is a major psychological breakthrough, because many men spend years emotionally disconnected from themselves while believing they are protecting their peace. But emotional numbness is not peace. Avoidance is not peace. Running is not peace. Real peace comes from emotional alignment. And soulmate love slowly guides the masculine toward that realization. Why the feminine must continue her own growth. The connection deepens when both souls evolve. One of the biggest misunderstandings in twin flame journeys is believing that the relationship is only about waiting for reunion. But true soulmate growth is much deeper than that. The connection exists to evolve both people individually. This means the feminine must continue growing too, not waiting emotionally, not pausing life, growing, healing, expanding, discovering herself beyond the relationship. This is extremely important because the masculine feels energy more deeply than many people realize. When the feminine becomes emotionally dependent on the outcome of the connection, the energy becomes heavy. But when she reconnects with herself fully, something powerful changes. Now her energy feels grounded, magnetic, authentic, and authenticity is what calls the masculine forward emotionally. Carl Jung believed that wholeness attracts wholeness, not perfection. Wholeness. Two people choosing each other consciously, instead of trying to complete each other emotionally. That is the foundation of healthy soulmate love. The masculine begins showing love differently. His actions slowly become more consistent. One of the clearest signs that the divine masculine is emotionally evolving is this. His actions begin matching his feelings. Not perfectly, but progressively. He becomes more present, more intentional, more emotionally available. He starts doing small things that reveal emotional sincerity, checking in unexpectedly, remembering important details, showing concern without being asked, creating emotional consistency where chaos once existed. This shift is important because true masculine love often reveals itself through actions more than words, especially in soulmate connections. The masculine may struggle expressing emotions verbally at first, but when he genuinely loves deeply, his energy begins showing up differently, more steady, more grounded, more open. Carl Jung believed that transformation becomes real when it appears in behavior, not only emotion. And that is exactly what happens here. the masculine slowly stops fighting the connection and starts participating in it consciously, but progressively. He becomes more present, more intentional, more emotionally available. He starts doing small things that reveal emotional sincerity, checking in unexpectedly, remembering important details, showing concern without being asked, creating emotional consistency where chaos once existed. This shift is important because true masculine love often reveals itself through actions more than words, especially in soulmate connections. The masculine may struggle expressing emotions verbally at first, but when he genuinely loves deeply, his energy begins showing up differently, more steady, more grounded, more open. Carl Jung believed that transformation becomes real when it appears in behavior, not only emotion. And that is exactly what happens here. The masculine slowly stops fighting the connection and starts participating in it consciously. The connection teaches him what real love actually is. Love becomes a choice, not emotional dependency. One of the final emotional shifts in the Fez lie masculine journey is learning the difference between need and choice. At the beginning, love felt emotionally dangerous because it triggered fear and attachment. But as he heals internally, something changes. Now he no longer loves from emptiness. He loves from truth. This means he stops seeking the feminine to complete him emotionally. Instead, he chooses her from a place of emotional clarity. And this is where soulmate love becomes powerful. Because real love is not emotional possession. It is conscious partnership. It is two emotionally awakened people choosing connection without losing themselves inside it. Jung described this beautifully through the idea of inner balance, the union between masculine and feminine energies within the self. Only when a person becomes internally balanced can they truly love another person without fear controlling the relationship. And this is the deeper purpose of the twin flame journey. Not obsession, not emotional suffering, transformation. The divine masculine falls deeply in love the moment he realizes the connection is changing him from within, not temporarily, permanently. He begins questioning old emotional patterns. He starts longing for authenticity instead of emotional control. He realizes vulnerability is not weakness, and slowly, the walls around his heart begin falling away. Carl Jung believed that the soul always pushes us toward growth, even when the ego resists it. That is why soulmate connections feel so intense. They are not designed to keep people comfortable. They are designed to awaken them. And when the masculine finally stops running from his emotions, he discovers something life-changing. The love he feared was never there to destroy him. It was there to help him become who he was always meant to be. When the divine masculine stops running and starts choosing love, introduction, the moment fear stops controlling him, there comes a point in the twin flame journey where the divine masculine becomes emotionally exhausted. Exhausted from overthinking, exhausted from resisting his own feelings, exhausted from pretending the connection does not matter. For a long time, he tried to maintain control over his emotions. He convinced himself he could stay detached. He believed distance would help him regain clarity. But eventually, something inside him changes. He realizes that running away has not brought him peace. It has only created emptiness. And this realization becomes the beginning of emotional surrender. Not weakness, not dependency, surrender. Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins when a person stops fighting their unconscious truth, and soulmate love forces that truth to the surface, because no matter how much the masculine tries to silence his feelings, The soul continues speaking underneath the noise, quietly, constantly, patiently, until one day he can no longer ignore it. He starts understanding what real strength is. Emotional openness no longer feels dangerous. One of the greatest shifts in the masculine journey happens when he redefines strength. Earlier in life, strength meant emotional control, staying distant, staying guarded, never appearing vulnerable. But soulmate love slowly teaches him something deeper. Real strength is emotional honesty and staying present even when emotions feel uncomfortable. Real strength is allowing someone to see your soul without hiding behind pride. This realization changes everything inside him. Now vulnerability no longer feels humiliating. It feels human. And once the masculine reaches this stage, the relationship begins transforming naturally, because emotional walls no longer dominate every interaction. Now he can listen without defensiveness, express himself without fear, love without constantly trying to escape. Carl Jung believed that healing happens when the masculine and feminine energies inside a person become balanced, and the twin flame connection pushes the masculine toward that inner balance.